forgot to start recording. Okay, just restate that we're in Pasuk Yud Bet and Parchet. The question here we are left with or about to deal with is how is it that after the people say that they are going to give everything back, and the rich people, they don't give any argument to Nehemiah. He still says we're going to now call over the Kohanim in order to have them take an oath that they will in fact keep their word. Okay, so let's take a look at Dat Sofrim. He says as follows. These words seem to be extra. They didn't even need to be written in the first place. And it's like they said they're going to do it. Then it says, as you say. Ulam, however, so that even though they said that they want to do this, there was still something in their minds that's still negative. Literally means they were negating the action. They were saying that they're doing this specifically because Nehemiah required it. They were doing it in his honor, to respect him. And in order to fulfill his need or his desire, his will. Not that they really felt that what they were about to do was really the right thing to do. In other words, out of respect, they were doing it. Very often, we've all been in situations where you do something that, look, you don't really think it's the right thing to do, but you respect the person who's asking you to do it in order to do it. And therefore, because it wasn't completely coming from their heart, and that's what makes it kind of awakens Nehemiah to say that they have to take an oath in order that they, as we see later, that they won't go back on their word. Okay, so that's the deal with this. Now, the interesting thing is that in the next pasuk, look at pasuk Yud Gimel. Let me just get the next slide be prepared here. Just a minute. Okay, don't bother with the slide yet. Let's take a look at pasuk Yud Gimel. Gam chotsni na'arti va'omra kacha yina'er Elohim et kol ha'ish asher elokim et hadavar hazeh mibeito umigio. So he does this seemly thing, this symbolic gesture. He shakes out the hem of his clothes and said, just like I'm shaking this out, God should shake you out from your homes and everything else. If you don't, so too you'll be shaken out and you'll be empty if you don't do this. Amen. They all said Amen, which reminds us the idea of the brachot and the klalot when they said Amen to each back in the Chumash. But the strange thing is, Vayahalalu et Hashem. They gave praise to God. Vayasa'am kadavar hazeh. And they did this. They did the thing. So what is this business here? What's going on in this pasuk? That they're giving praise to Hashem. Like it didn't sound very promising in the last slide of how they were approaching this request or demand, really, from Nehemiah. So let's take a look. Vayalu et Hashem. Ha'am sameach Nehemiah. I'm going to keep it a little bit bigger in case you're using your phone. The bigger I make it, the more fuzzy it looks. I guess I didn't take a sharp enough picture. Sorry. Ha'am sameach Nehemiah oram la'asot ma'aseh tov. Now, this is really amazing. We just said a minute ago, Dat Sofrim just said a minute ago, that the people's hearts weren't 100% into it. Because to the point that they were doing it out of respect for Nehemiah, but they weren't doing it necessarily for the whole heart, and therefore he has to make them take an oath. Now, after Nehemiah says, look, here's the deal, guys. I really appreciate what you're saying, but I'm going to take it one step further. You see my clothes? Okay, I'm going to shake them all out, just like I'm shaking it all out. That's what God should do to you if you don't keep your word. Now it says that the people were happy. In retrospect, they're saying, in a sense, that Nehemiah is getting them to do the right thing. And they're giving praise to God. That just like in Shirat Dvorah, where Dvorah gives praise to God, she talks about the concept of the people stepping up and volunteering to fight against Sisera, and she gives praise to God. In other words, it's not really what they wanted to do, but they were requested to do it. They realized it's the right thing to do, and then it was a praise of Hashem. What does it mean, the Vayasa Am Kidvar Hazeh? Hanoshim ba'u lidei hesder im halviim and halovim be'et hahi. The people who had lim is the ones who were biting, but it's an expression used in halacha, means ones who are owed a debt, came to an agreement with the borrowers at that moment. Lo nechtav mahaya be'atid. It doesn't tell us what did happen in the future. We don't see really what was the result. We can only imagine, but it doesn't record for us what was the result of this heskem, or this agreement to return everything. But with this action, it was an awakening in a sense to be careful to collect monies that were owed from people who were poor. Me'idach, on the other hand, it's also possible that in the future that the rich people did not want to give loans to the poor people, because maybe they'll never get their money back. After hundreds of years, and this you should have maybe thought about this while we were just starting this line of thought. We know that Hillel made a takana, a decree, in halacha, that allowed or enabled a person to collect debts that were in theory that were canceled by Shemitah. We know that was called the pruzbo, which, if you were paying attention just a couple months ago, back just before Rosh Hashanah, that was the topic, because except for certain segments of population, which I know briskers are like this, but I'm not sure who else, all other people felt that a cancellation of debts in Shemitah takes place at the very end of Shemitah, which is why everyone had to write a pruzbo before Shemitah ended. So just a couple of months ago. So the whole idea of the pruzbo was, Hillel said, look, we're getting to be closer to Shemitah. People's debts are going to be canceled. So maybe the people won't get money for loans because they're going to get canceled. Why would I want to loan money? I'm never going to get back. And therefore he instituted the concept of pruzbo. These two actions prove the idea of loans was not necessarily a very great or positive way as far as a solution, and they needed to find other ways to prevent problems in the community. In spite of the fact that sometimes one might have to overlook or to relinquish his debt or the amount that's due to him, but it's not the best situation. We know that. Assume for a moment that you had the ability to loan someone 5,000 shekel. And it's a 5,000 shekel that would really hurt if it doesn't eventually come back to you. Obviously, you're not looking for interest. You can't. But you might be a little bit more reticent to loan that money if you knew that there was a decent chance you might not get it back. If you have all the money in the world and 5,000 shekels is not going to make a big difference to you, okay, so you say, I'm willing to take a chance. If I get it back, fine. If I don't, fine. We've all been in some situation like that where it could be small money. It could be 100 shekel, which is not small, but relative to 5,000 shekel, it's a little bit of money. Can you loan me? And there have been times over my life where I know where people ask me to borrow, 50 shekel, 100, whatever it might be. And I already know I'm never going to see that money again. It's fine. If I do, I do. I don't, I don't. But it's not me. We're not talking about you and me. We're talking about people who have the wherewithal that, let's say, may be very, very wealthy, and they're going to not necessarily give their money freely. So that is not a solution. Loans are not necessarily a solution to keep a society in business, so to speak. So they had to also find some alternatives. Now, let me make this one. Okay, let's bring that down there. Let's take a look now, please, at Pasuk. Let's just take Pasuk Tetvav. Yudalad Tetvav and I think Tet Zayin. Yeah, actually just Yudalad and Tetvav. I'm not going to read both Pasukim right now, but they're basically saying like how much Nehemia had in his, I'm going to use the word palace, so it wasn't his palace. In his palace, in his household, people he had to feed, the monies he did not spend on himself. He's, in a sense, giving chizuk to the people and said, look, I didn't do anything that would have gotten me more money. I didn't make money on other people's back. This is very similar to things we saw in Sefer Shmuel with Shmuel himself. We saw it about Moshe Rabbeinu in the Torah. So let's take a look here of this discussion here that he has in the Dat Sofrim. It says, B'derech Agav, and just kind of a by-the-by way, נוצרת מדברי נחמיה תמונה על מה שהתרחש בירושלים סביב לביתו של נחמיה. We see wasn't the goal in these psukim wasn't for Nehemia to say, wow, I had 150 people I had to feed, and but I didn't give this rich man anything. It wasn't about that. But in a derech agav way, kind of in a roundabout way, we start to get a picture of what the home of Nehemia was like at this moment in Yerushalayim. Yom yom sa'adu al shulchano anashim rabim. On a daily basis, many people were fed or ate at his table. רבים מאוד, שבוודאי היו עסוקים בתפקידים חשובים. וכן באו אורחים לשולחנו. So he obviously had some of the upper crust of society, so to speak, and also other guests at his table. באווירה הקדושה של ירושלים, של ימי אנשי כנסת הגדולה. Let's go back for a second. When we started to say for Ezra, when I gave you the introduction, I told you that Ezra was the one who basically was the beginning of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, in English known as the Men of the Great Assembly. They did, among many things, was the institution of the Shmona Esrei. Shimon HaTzadik was the last remnant, as we say it in Pirkei Avot, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. He was the last one, the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. So we're talking that they were a power. You're talking Nevi'im, talking very strong individuals in terms of their religiosity. So during this time period of holiness in Yerushalayim, and by the dint of the fact there was the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, bevadai hayu ele gam misibot lediunim masal matan shel halacha v'hanaga. Obviously, there had to be various halachic discussions about halacha, or discussion about halacha and about leadership. Hasganim aniskarim, because he mentions in this psukim, I didn't really read him inside, but he mentions about sganim. It's possible it's these people, it's not, we don't know for sure, that these people he's referring to that ate at his table were among those from the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah who were involved in both establishing and putting into practice the takanot of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. ראשי מקומות הלימוד וכדומה. מן האמור להלן, נראה לכאורה כי בין הסגנים היו גם אנשים מטעם הממשל. It seems from what we'll see later, and among these sganim, also there were probably people from the government itself. But they were not the main people we're focusing on. He was. Because it's not proper, wouldn't have been proper for Nehemiah to have given any form of praise in this holy book of his about saying, and we had all these people from the government as well. They weren't Jewish, they weren't involved, and he was trying to marginalize them anyways. We didn't want their help in building the Beit HaMikdash. We didn't want their help in repairing the wall. And we come to a very problematic pasuk, a very troubling pasuk. Okay, so here I have us, let me make this small. We're going to look at a pasuk, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to a Gemara in Sanhedrin that deals with this. Way back when we started to say for Nehemiah, let me just see something here, which was in August. We started, part of the introduction was that the pasuk I'm about to quote, I mentioned it then and briefly talked about the Gemara. We're going to take a look at it now a little bit more in depth. You take a look at the last pasuk in the parak, pasuk Yud Tet. After all this back and forth, and the people saying they're going to take the stuff and give it back to the people, and Nehemiah says, "Look, I'm not taking anything, and I didn't take anything, etc., etc." Then it says an interesting statement. Zachar li Elohai letovah. Nehemiah says to Hashem, remember me for the good. Kol asher asiti al ha'am hazeh. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we were just reading our last week, when we were reading the parak. Remember all the good that I have done. And I should be remembered for the good for that. Now, there's a problem with that we just touched on. We're going to take a look now. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which we're going to look at in a minute. But in order to understand the Gemara, we have to understand one other thing. Back when we learned the beginning of Sefer Ezra, I said that when you take a look at Tanakh is made up of 24 books. And one of those books is Ezra Nehemia. At one point, it would seem, and we're going to see that now in the Gemara, it was only known as Ezra. Either way, whether you called only Ezra or it's called Ezra Nehemia, it still only counts as one book. So let's take a look at this Gemara. Okay, this is Gemara in Sanhedrin. It is on Tzadi Gimel Amud Bet. Michti, let's see. Kol mila de Ezra Nehemia ben Chachalya amrinu uNehemia ben Chachalya my time lo ikri sifra shemeh. How come the book of Ezra, the book of Nehemia, is not called by his name? Now, again, at this point, it would seem that although they don't have printed books, but they had scrolls that were handwritten, but it didn't have, like you had the Sefer Treasa, you had Dvarim, you had Shemot, but Nehemia was at this point evidently not yet called Nehemia. Why wasn't it called that? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said, "Mipnei shechzik tova latzmo," because he literally means he held or took hold of goodness for himself. What does that mean? Shnema, and it quotes our pasuk, "Zachra li Elohai letova." He said that God should remember me for good. David nami meima aman. Zochreni Hashem b'yotzon amecha pakdeni b'shuatecha. So David also seems to have said something about like, remember me for something good. Gemara says, not a problem. David rachmehu de kabai. David was asking not for himself, but he was asking for Hashem to institute or to put it in place rachamim. Rav Yosef amar mipnei shesiper b'gvutan shel rishonim. He says, Rav Yosef says a different reason why Nehemiah was not zocha, at least at this point in history, to have his name on the masthead of the name of this book. Because what did he do? One of the psukim that we read, that we just kind of went through real quickly, was about the Pechot HaRishonim, the earlier governors that came before him. He derided them because he said that Pechot HaRishonim, asher lefanai, hichbidu ala'am. They made life of people, of the Jews, difficult. They weighed it down on them. He said, like, look at all this they did, and I don't do that to you. I could have done it, and I didn't. So according to one opinion, the book of Nehemiah at that time was not called Nehemiah because Nehemiah held this like, hey, remember me for the good. And it was boasting. And I know that way back when, at the beginning, when we talked about this, I don't know if Ari, you remember, but you and I discussed this, I think offline actually. But this I'm just telling you the Gemara, and I still remember what you said, and it doesn't negate. You could be right. It's also possible. But I'm just telling you what the Gemara says. I try to remember what people say to me over time. But the other opinion, Rav Yosef is saying that that he was something of a Genai, something negative of the people that came before him. So I ask you a question. Let's just talk about Rav Yosef's opinion for a second. Rav Yosef said, I'll tell you why the whole name of the book is not named after him, because he said something negative about the people that came before him. So what? That's the reason to lose the whole name of the book being called on his name? So we have talked many times in this class, other classes over the years, of how Hashem judges people. And we talk about the fact that tzaddikim, and those of you who are learning Tanya, we're not talking about that kind of tzaddik right now, just in general, our generic term of tzaddik, are judged kechut ha'se'ara, like a hair's breadth. Meaning that with something when if I were to be told by God, go and talk to a rock, and I hit it, and water came flowing out, okay, maybe not such a big deal. There's still a tremendous kid of Hashem. But Moshe Rabbeinu, for him, it was a massive error. So how do we understand that? So you imagine, I've used this example before. You have two cars next to each other. You have a brand new Tesla, which is not cheap, and you have a brand new, it's no longer brand new because they don't make them anymore, a Yugo, which is kind of like a tuna fish can on wheels for $14 with a full tank of gas. And you take a key and you scratch both cars about this long on each car. One will do damage of thousands of dollars, and one will do damage of about 14 agorot. Why? Because the one that's the Tesla or the Countach, the Lamborghini, the expensive car, that scratch is a massive infringement, so to speak, of its massive quality. But that same scratch on a Yugo doesn't mean the same thing. It's just another scratch. So here, what Yosef is saying, at least I believe, is that you never want to disparage the people that came before you. But there's a rule in business. I actually, some of you know that I was in the business world for 17 years before I became the rabbi of a shul. And there's a rule, and it's a tongue-in-cheek statement. There's a rule in business that when you take over for someone's job, especially if they are fired or they've left the company, that for the first 6 months, whatever goes wrong, you can blame on the old guy. Oh, look, he didn't know what he was doing. He did this wrong. He did that wrong. You have a little bit of a grace period. Unless he's been promoted and you were his subordinate, then you don't want to do that. So it's normal when you have someone who's come before you and you're a leader and you say, look, he's comparing himself. Look, I didn't do what these guys did. I was much better to you, and I want you to be better than that even and do better. So for some people, that wouldn't be a big deal problem to stay. But Rabbi Yosef is saying that the way that Hashem judges, that was too egregious a statement for there to be any wiggle room. And therefore, he, in theory, lost his ability to have the book named after him. So at what point did it actually get the stamp or the name Nehemia on the book? I'd have to look. Yes, Ari wants to know. Yes, I'm going to, please, Ari, come on, unmute yourself. Ari wants to know if he could say what he said back when we talked about the introduction to the book. And I was quoting this Gemara. Ari had a very nice comment. Yeah, please do share that.
Many years ago, I was an activist for getting the Jews out of the Soviet Union and out of Ethiopia. Okay? I was not going to the demonstration. I was organizing them and all kinds of campaigns. I spent a lot of time on it. It was during the late 1970s when the Kremlin shut the doors to Russia solid. Almost nobody was getting out. We were banging our heads, and nothing was happening, and people were making fun of me. Why don't you give up? Nothing's going to happen. They're never going to let the Jews out of the Soviet Union. The Jews from Ethiopia are never going to come to Israel. They really made fun of me, and it hurt. Okay? $30 later, I got my answer. 2 answers. One, our brothers and sisters are here from Ethiopia. Our brothers and sisters are here from the former Soviet Union. I went to hear Yuli Edelstein talk. Does everybody know who he is? He was an Asir Tzion, one of the big leaders. I asked him, was it any good? Did we do any good? Okay. He said one day he was in labor camp at the end of all hope. The assistant head warden came to him and said, Edelstein, I want you to know my safe is overflowing, bursting to the seams with letters from Kutzel Arts. And you're never going to read any one of them, get any one of them. Some of those letters I sent, some of them I organized. I spent a lot of time, okay, that sometime during the 70s, and when I got to Israel, nothing was happening. We were banging against the walls. The Israeli government was not supporting us. I just want to know, Hashem, is it worthwhile? Am I doing any good? Okay? I can understand what Nehemia went through. Okay? 30 years later, I got my answer. Okay? But on that aspect, I can understand it. Okay? I'm done.
Right. Good. Very good. And I do remember you telling me that. I thought that was very worthwhile sharing. And like I say, there are when there's a comment in the Gemara There's other opinions elsewhere that don't necessarily support it. It's I think it's say Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. So I think it's very good. Ayil shakach. Thank you very much, Aye, and for all the work you did as well. Okay, what I want to do is go to a bit of an introduction for the next chapter. For those of you who like intrigue, politics, it's an interesting para coming up because it's going to give us, I just want to get something here on the screen I want to use for the introduction for myself. Just a minute. Maybe over here. This over here. Okay. It's an interesting paragraph. I don't want to just jump into it, read it, and start asking questions. I want to give the overview of the whole chapter first, because this is one of those. This happens every once in a while. We have a chapter that you really need to see the whole picture before you really go into it. Let's regroup and think again, put into perspective what's been happening here. The Jews come back, they build Beit HaMikdash, they're fixing through Nehemia, they're building the wall, fixing the wall and all the doorways and everything else of the gates. They get stopped, they get harassed, and Nehemia is very adamant in trying to make sure it continues. It makes sure that the social justice issues are taken care of. And in the background, we've already heard from certain people, such as a man named Sanballat and Geshem, that they just keep making trouble for the Jews. And the more things are going well for us, the more we hear from them. The more things that are progressing on our end, the more problems Sanballat and his people are giving us. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction. I just kind of summarized it on my screen. I'm not going to read it verbatim, just as my reminder. So at this point, again, even though it doesn't tell us, oh, wow, now everything was fine and everyone's singing Kumbaya and they're all getting along, we can make the basic assumption that the social justice issue has gone by the wayside, therefore allows them to continue working on what they needed to focus on. So after Nehemiah's getting some form of at least some safety and security for Yerushalayim, now his enemies, our enemies, pipe in and they start to be a little bit more desperate what they want to do, how they're going to try to see to it that they're going to hurt us. Now, we know that if you look historically at Israel, just in the last, say, 20 years, 20, 25 years, how the tactics of our enemies internally have changed. Of course, that not any of them work, thank God. Whether it was stabbing, intifada, or the ramming, or God forbid, the blowing of buses, and all these things that we've seen over the last 20 years, always different tactics, all different types of terror, wreaking horrible havoc on our people at times, and yet we still resilient. And let's say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. They think they're going to, God forbid, stab another Jew, God forbid, ram another Jew. All of a sudden, they're going to end up with a state. I'll give them a state, but it won't be in the land of Israel. There's a lot of land in Antarctica. So here's the same kind of thing that's going to happen. What they did first was they tried to publicly shame them, embarrass them, tried to make reports to the king. Nothing seems to be working for our enemies. So Sanballat and Geshem send a request, almost like a secret request to Nehemiah. Listen, we have an idea. We want to meet you in the valley of what's called Ono. We'll come to that in a little while. And Nehemiah sends his messengers back and says, thanks, but no thanks, right? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. No, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So he's not falling for anything. These guys he knows are no good mix. So he sends back messengers to decline. He said, look, you know what, guys? Thanks for the invitation. I really have nothing to talk to you about. Besides which, I'm still busy finishing this wall. They send messengers again and again and again, 4 times. On the 5th time, they change their tactic. It's not just an invitation. They send a message to Nehemiah. They hear rumors. What's the rumor? That the rumors are that Nehemiah has appointed Nevi'im to declare him as king, and he's going to make a rebellion. And what do they do? What does Sanballat and Geshem do? He said, listen, we want to help you. We're very generous. We want to meet you, Nehemia, and protect you from the king, because he may come after you because he thinks that his kingdom is going to be in trouble if you actually set yourself up as king, as the king. And we have to figure out how to get rid of these accusations somehow. Nehemia, obviously, he's not about to fall for any of this nonsense, and he says they're rumors. Give me a break. Forget about it. I'm not meeting with you. And then, while this is going on, Nehemia comes to a house of a man named Shmaya. He's known as someone who is housebound. He's atzur. What atzur means, bound. And we're going to, not tonight, but we're going to discuss what does that mean. Who cares? He's housebound, and what was he housebound? We'll see. Shmaya recommends something to them. It says, here's what you should do. You know, there are these rumors going around. So maybe what you want to do is to barricade yourself in the Beit HaMikdash. And then the reason you want to do that is because I have it on good authority that there's some assassins coming to kill you tonight. So you should probably hide in the Beit HaMikdash. And he says the Beit HaMikdash, we're going to see, it means the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. And Nehemia says, I don't think so. I really don't think so. First, it's not my way to run away from something. Second of all, if I go into that area, I'm not a Kohen, I'm going to die. So what are you doing here? So what does Nehemia realize? That this man Shmaya, who he thought at first was giving him, why he ends up in his house in the first place, we'll have to come to. But this man Shmaya that's giving him this information was lying. And he was probably hired, not probably, he was hired by Toviah, Sanballat, and others to cause Nehemia to sin by going into Beit HaMikdash, to mess with his name, and maybe he would die as a result of that. So after this happens, Nehemia asks Hashem to punish the bad guys and the false prophets, the false Nevi'im, who wanted to intimidate him from continuing building the wall. And despite all the problems and the provocations and the rumors and all the attempts to sully his name, the wall was completed. We'll see this not tonight, we'll see it next week, on the 25th day of Elul, after 52 days of work on the wall. The enemies finally concede, they finally give in that they're not going to be able to block the project. And they're going to have to come up with something else at some other point. I'm not going to give any more about the parak right now, but I think that'll give us enough of a basis to work on next week, Bezrat Hashem. And I just wanted to mention one thing before, a couple things here before Hanukkah. First of all, this week on Wednesday morning, Bezrat Hashem, this week in general, there's going to be, this week and next week, 3 programs in the OU that are going to be taking place here in Malay Adumim, one of which I'll be involved in on Wednesday morning, Bezrat Hashem. It's going to take place at Musar Avicha, upstairs in the shul. Yom Yiyun, it's quote Yom Yiyun because it's only part of the day. It's from, I think, 9:30 or something like that till 11:30 or 12, and then follow with after that, whatever time it is over. It's going to be mincha time, and it's going to be all different topics, having obviously connected to Hanukkah. If you can make it, it's great. Love to see you there if you can. There's a women's thing. I don't know if it's tonight or tomorrow night. I honestly don't remember. There's a Hanukkah party coming up. So I don't work for the OU, but I'm involved in the programming a little bit. So I'm just passing that along. If you want any other further information, if you want to register, I send out the link for that as well. And if for some reason you didn't register, you just can show up. That'd be great too. I mentioned every year since I've started to actually go back one step. When I was the Rav in the Shul in Chicago, I think it's about the 2nd or 3rd year I was there. The December 25th it's a holiday as far as the legal holiday in the United States, and forever the shul had a holiday schedule for davening. It was, instead of 6:40 in the morning, it was 7:30 and 8:30 or 7:30 and 8. I don't remember what it was. And I decided that, you know what, I don't think it's appropriate for us to change our davening schedule for December 25th. And I went to the person who gave the shiur for Daf Yomi after davening, and which would have been, because it's a holiday, quote unquote legal holiday. I said, if we changed and have davening regular time 6:40, would you be willing to give your Daf Yomi at 7:15? So he said, of course. So we had a very nice sized minyan, and for years we did that. It got pushed to the wayside by the side after I was gone, but that's okay. Do what I can do, and therefore I think, and that kind of put me in a certain frame of mind ever since then, including when I was living there, that, and it's even more so here, that when one of the things of Hanukkah, remember the Syrian Greeks didn't want to kill us. They wanted to stop us from keeping and practicing our religion. And that process, which, if you just a little teaser, began 150 years before the story of Hanukkah, which we'll talk about on Wednesday morning, Bezrat Hashem. And therefore, what they wanted to do is to stop us from learning Torah. So when there are shiurim that are canceled because, it's Hanukkah, then in a certain respect, the Greeks won. So that's why I try to have my classes during Hanukkah. Whether I'm going to have it this coming Sunday night, the first night of Hanukkah, or the last night of Hanukkah, the Sunday night class, I'll let you know, will take place, Bezrat Hashem. The Tanya class will take place on Tuesday night, and the Basilat Yesharim class will take place on Wednesday morning like usual, but not this week, not to do with Hanukkah because of this special program. So if I didn't confuse you with all that, hopefully we'll see. I'll let you know if it'll be this coming Sunday night or the following Sunday night. I might do a little studio audience poll to see if there are people who have a Hanukkah party or something in their family that may keep them away. But as usual, if it's only even a couple people, I want to have class. And in the meantime, I wish you all a good evening and hopefully see you at other classes and maybe see you Wednesday morning. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. Have a great evening.